All right, so good morning and welcome to the Miles Potter Humes House story. This is a program that is presented by Center County Library and Historical Museum. My name is Robin Degeratu and I will be the facilitator this morning. I will be facilitating for my colleague Erin Hicks, who I'm pleased to introduce to all of you. Erin Hicks is a creative museum professional specializing in museum education, local historical research, and artifact interpretation. With a background in art and design, she is especially passionate about the areas of local history where art and history intersect. She is driven to help Pennsylvania Room patrons improve their self-directed historical and genealogical research by fostering curiosity and inquiry. Erin holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in art history and a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in painting from the University of Colorado, Boulder, and a Master of Arts in Museum Studies from SUNY Buffalo State in Buffalo, New York. When she's not assisting visitors at Center County Library and Historical Museum, you can find her reading mysteries, tending to her houseplants, or picnicking in Pennsylvania state parks. Erin, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Robin. Hi, I heard Robin naming off some of the attendees, and I know you're very familiar to me too. But I want to welcome everybody here today to this casual sort of Pennsylvania Room Historical Museum story that I'd like to tell. So Robin has pointed out that I do have a background in museum education and local historical research. With a background in art and design, specifically interior design, I really do love the point at which history and design intersect, and that's typically at architectural history. And it's particularly interesting on a local level because there's sort of regional differences with different buildings. So we will start at where we're at today. As Robin said, most of you know, we're at the Center County Library and Historical Museum, where we're located at the corner of Allegheny and Howard Streets in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania. We have a lot of patrons that we serve in this special building and via the Pennsylvania Room and the Historical Museum. And one of the most common questions that I get usually when tourists are passing through Bellefonte is, what is this house? What is this? And, you know, who lived here? So I sort of wanted to conceive of a class or a webinar or an experience where we could kind of go through the story because it's a little bit more complex than I think a patron might expect. But since we are a library, we will start. Once upon a time, there was the Miles Potter Humes House story. And in this unique home, there were three influential families who, over the course of its existence, occupied the original stone building that the PA room and the Historical Museum and also administrative offices function out of today. So I guess before I begin, though, I'd just like to tell you that there will not be a quiz at the end of this. My hope for you today on this Sunday is that you just have kind of a chance to sort of sit back and relax and just hear a fun little story about the ins and outs of the Miles Potter Humes house, and learn a little bit about the occupants, but mostly I do highlight the architectural transformation of the home because it's really interesting. And also I was sort of motivated because when patrons would, or visitors, museum visitors would come in to ask, you know, what is this? The complexity of the story was kind of overwhelming to try to tell someone in 4 minutes. They'd glaze over and you lose them. So I mostly am motivated by my own curiosity. I was learning things as I have been working in the Pennsylvania room, and not everything fit. So I really wanted to dig into this to learn more about it. And so this is the kind of the ensuing story. So we'll begin in 1800 when Center County is formed. And just to give you a sense, like I said, there's no quiz, but in 1805, James Harris and James Dunlap, who were the co-founders of Bellefonte, they were laying out the Bellefonte, and the site that the Miles Potter's Hume's house currently sits on was conveyed to Jacob and Amy Way for $95. And about 7 years later, the lot sells again for about $145. At this point, it's just transferring hands until Captain Joseph Miles in 1814. He is the son of Colonel Samuel Miles. He is a co-founder of Milesburg, Pennsylvania. And among other things, he is an iron master at the center furnace, which those of you who are familiar with the area will recognize that obviously as being in State College. And it's also, the Center Furnace Mansion is also where the Center County Historical Society is currently located as well. So like our location, the Center Furnace is also open for visitors and a historic site. So the Miles family is influential, to say the least, in this area. And so I didn't want to delve too deeply into that Miles family, but one of the sons, Joseph Miles, he purchases the site where the Miles Hume's house currently is. And then a year later, he's constructing now what we know as the original limestone Georgian style home, where he did live with his wife, Susan. And that's great. But you might say, well, that's great. What's Georgian architecture style? So generally, the Georgian architectural style is named for four King Georges who ruled England and the British Empire from the early 1700s to the 1830s. And so regionally, Georgian houses were built in central Pennsylvania from about 1790 until the 1850s, and then became popular again in the early 1900s, which at that point would be known as the Georgian Revival. So this was a type of architecture common for that time period and would have been popular. Center County examples are simpler versions of the more formal English architect design styles, but they essentially have, here I've listed 6 key elements to a Georgian style home. They're symmetrical. So if you, I think you can see my mouse, if you folded this house in half, both sides would mirror the other. There's usually 5 bays or sections, and so I have this showing here what a bay is. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bays. It will have a gable roof. In our case, we have a fairly low gable roof, which is gable as in forming a triangle if you were to look at it from the side elevation. It also has end chimneys, so right here and here. It also has elements of shuttered windows. And I don't want to put Robin on the spot, but I know just recently we have completed or almost completed our painting project where we painted the shutters of the Miles Hume's house. And I think in the process of working with the Historic Architecture Review Board, we determined that for this time that we had 2 different color shutters. It wasn't actually a mistake, that it's part of Center County vernacular. Is there anything more that you can add with that, Robin?
So I would simply say that we've talked, so our organization has spoken with a number of different architectural experts, and there is a trend in central Pennsylvania wherein you know, the shutters on the top, on an upper floor, and the shutters on the lower floor will be different colors, dramatically different. As you saw in our building, the bottom floor has white shutters and the top floor has darker. We argued over whether they were black or dark green. I'm still not sure exactly where we landed with those, but that particular style, it's a vernacular iteration of the Georgian style, but also, I mean, we see it in other types of homes as well. So that's kind of a particular flavor that is specific to Central Pennsylvania. Yes.
Thank you. And then the last sort of key element, as our house is built with limestone. So indeed, here is our lovely example of a Georgian style architecture. And I have this photo dated the mid 1800s. So this, I guess, is a great example of why I personally was interested in this topic. With the photos that we have in the museum collection, as you look through our photos through time, you will end up seeing different things appearing at different times. As you can see here, there's 2 end chimneys and a low gable roof without any dormer windows. There's also not shutters in this photograph as well. So the overarching story of this home is that it's seemingly constantly evolving. There's either improvements being made or changes architecturally, and it seems to follow maybe whatever sorts of trends were happening. At the corner of Allegheny and Howard Street is a very prominent place in Bellefonte to have your home located. So I do think that it is, whatever is happening there isn't going unnoticed. And we'll see that kind of come back a little bit later in the story. So only about 15 years later, Joseph Miles, because he was sort of a vigorous businessman, yet he was representative of his successful father, and he was engaged in a handful of industries. It was only 15 years later that he is believed to have needed to leave the area. So at that point, he sold the home to William Wilson Potter and his wife, Lucy Winters Alexander Potter, for now the sum of $3,200. Sadly, the Potter portion of our story is not very long, as it evolves into the Humes name. In 1839, William Potter does die suddenly. He was a distinguished lawyer and later became a United States congressman. But as he dies, he leaves his wife, Lucy Winters Alexander Potter, as the sole inhabitant of the home because the couple had no children. But what Lucy did have was a niece who also was her namesake. So don't forget, there won't be a quiz. Lucy Winters Alexander Potter's niece, Lucy Winters Alexander, married Edward C. Humes in 1843. So Lucy Potter invited the couple to live with her in her home, and they believe they were glad to do so. So glad that they actually, I think, were in the process of having their own home built, and they decided that this was something that they wanted to do. So the evolution from Potter to Humes is sort of a long one, as the two families live together. And shortly after they're married, Edward and Lucy do have 3 children. 1844, William Potter Humes is born, and the next year, Anna Elmira Humes is born. They have a 3rd son who I believe dies at an early age, so he doesn't really play into the later portion of the story with a passing of the home. But as the family grows and they're occupying the house, in the 1870s, Edward C. Humes, who was a banker, a very successful banker, he now added a two-story brick wing to the northern side of the house, and also a Victorian porch and dormer windows. So this is where you start to see some mixed elements, architectural elements coming into play, and it kind of begins the start of losing that purely Georgian style look that we had before. And this is a great photograph to show those changes. So here's our original Georgian structure with our end chimneys. They have added dormer windows through this original roof. They kind of have changed the ornament of the front door. They've added what they're describing as Victorian porches here, and then also this two-story addition that they have. It looks kind of like it's really only connected sort of in this back corner. So I'll back up then. After those additions were made, then Aunt Lucy Potter does die at age 85, and Edward C. Humes and Lucy Humes inherit the home. So now it's become the Humes house. And we're just blazing through the births and deaths here. But then in 1886, Lucy Humes dies. And in a short while after that, in 1895, Edward C. Humes dies. But in less than a year, William Potter Humes and his sister Anne Elmira decide that they'd like to really renovate the home. And in fairness, when the Georgian structure is being constructed in around 1815, you know, it's about 80 years prior. So what's happening along Allegheny Street is, and in Bellefonte in general, is that there's sort of a building boom. And you can see examples probably of other business people's success, and also a lot of residential construction that's happening in that area is Victorian. So by some standards, you could imagine that the base or Georgian architecture might seem a little outdated at this point. So William Potter Humes and Anne Elmira, but mostly William Potter, decide to make a splash, and they're going to renovate. And the splash is evident on the front page of the Keystone Gazette on April 17th, 1896. It's a great headline. And so in case some of you can't read well, I certainly don't expect you to read this, I'm going to read portions of this article because I think its charm kind of speaks for itself. William P. Humes will change the general appearance of his residence in Bellefonte, the house to be raised. W.P. Humes, who is officially connected with the Bellefonte First National Bank, was in Philadelphia recently with a view of getting a contractor who would raise his stone residence on the corner of Allegheny and Howard Streets about 3 feet from its foundation. Moving a frame building or raising one is a comparatively easy thing, but to raise a stone building like that of Mr. Humes requires something more than the ordinary mechanical skill. It is said several hundred jacks will be used to complete the work, and thus it will be necessary to employ a large number of men during the raising of the building, as every part of it must move at the same time. It will be a feat that perhaps has never been accomplished in Bellefonte, and no doubt will be watched with interest. I can't imagine myself reading this in 1896 and thinking, you know, and not thinking, whoa, William, you know, this isn't your daddy's, as the saying goes, this isn't your daddy's Georgian style architecture home. So they're already talking about kind of a large an engineering feat. And here's our lovely picture that we have of the process. So in April 1896, here's a photograph of the portion of the process in progress. So if you can remember back, there was an addition that was removed and demolished, and some other changes to the house remain. So the dormer windows obviously remain, but what was previously an addition here with Victorian porches is now gone. So another big splash. I wanted to include this because if you follow the articles, the newspaper articles, for the year of 1896 to 97, it's kind of akin to blowing up your news feed. Once every 2 weeks or so, there's a mention or an article describing the construction process. So it really is true that it had been a noteworthy engineering feat, and then also probably attracted a lot of attention. So I'll read you a little bit more here. It is the intention of Mr. William P. Humes to leave only the stone portion of the house intact and have it designed after the colonial style of architecture. A Philadelphia builder has been employed to raise the building 3 feet and we suppose move it back from the street. The location is about the finest in town, and with a building set back 30 or 40 feet from the street, it would make a beautiful home. We do not know Mr. Humes' intention, but when he has so much ground, there can be no reason why it should not be used to enhance his home. May 22nd is a pretty vivid description of the process that was just depicted in that photograph. It's a difficult job, the raising of so large a stone building, and an expert mechanic is here superintending the work. The timber that will be used is on the ground and has opened the eyes of builders in this section. It is Florida yellow pine in 12 by 12 sticks, some 50 feet long, without a knot or a blemish. It is proposed to run a number of them under the building, thereby employing about 160 hydraulic jacks to raise it by a single turn of each jack at the same time. This gradual upward movement will not twist the house nor give any liability to disfigurement. Some other details included: June 5th, the building is estimated to weigh 800 tons and is being moved on greased ways. It has been moved about 4 feet already. So they're giving these progress updates, as I said, about every 2 weeks. I did not include them, but Center Democrat newspaper mentions the Humes house on June 4th, 11th, and the 25th. So the Bellefonte citizens are getting a very good look and update on the progress that William Humes is making on making this home his own, as opposed to his father's. So as I mentioned, it really was an engineering feat which occupied the attention of young and old for many months. William P. Humes and his sister finally, in February 1897, it's reported, I want to add, in twice in one newspaper, twice in one issue, and then also in the Keystone Gazette, all for the same day. So it's garnering a lot of attention, but finally, they're comfortably located in their new and handsome residence on the corner of Allegheny and Howard Street. It is now one of the finest residences in Buffalo. The painting and papering was done by Rash William of Bellefonte and is the finest to be found in town. It is simply beautiful and it must be seen to be appreciated. Mr. Humes spared no money in remodeling the house, and therefore he has every possible convenience. I love this because it is talking about the interior design. The fine wood carving that is being done for the remodeled Humes house, corner of Allegheny and Howard Streets, is being done at the Phillipsburg Furniture Company's plant. Ta-da! Here is the transformation This is a 1910 photograph that we have. So about 10 years earlier is when the completion of the renovation occurs. But there's some key elements about what was taken away and what was added. So I had mentioned that the rear addition currently was removed, but then a new addition was created. Also, this front porch and the side porch were created, including on those porches, there's also a use of what is a Doric column, and you know that by the capital that's on that column. Doric capitals are plainer without much ornament. Also, they're including balustrades or these ornaments, or excuse me, these railings that are much more ornamental than you would have ever seen a Georgian structure. And so we're kind of moving into, you know, this zone where the house could kind of hold its own on a block with newly constructed Victorian homes, where other successful influential business people of Bellefonte are also building homes as well. What's also added here too, that still exists today, it's difficult to see in this photograph, but it's a Palladian doorway. And what makes it Palladian is a rounded arch at the top, and then vertical rectangular glass windows on the side. The hexagon bay window is new, and then also a second floor front balcony exists as well in this edition. I really love maps, and I really love Sanborn fire insurance maps. And so if you're not familiar with these maps, they're the architectural historian's favorite. They were produced by the Sanborn Map Company, and with the purposes of documenting the many things, but what buildings existed, what their dimensions were, and what materials they were made out of, so that the company could estimate their insurance, you know, appropriately. So these documents, this documentation of building construction is really useful for being able to see how buildings or areas transform over time. So when you lay the 1892 Sanborn map of the corner of Howard and Allegheny next to the 1897 version, you will see the changes in plan representation. So they're not always, it's not a huge exciting moment unless you kind of know what is represented in these maps. And so the color of the structure is representing what that structure is made out of. So blue in this case is that it's a stone house. Pink, I do believe, is wood, or maybe yellow is wood, and pink is brick. So in the shift with these maps, what you can see is how different the home changed between Edward and William. Here is the plan representation of that removal of the 1870s wing and then the Victorian porches that previously existed. It also, you can see just in this tiny little representation on this map, you can see that in 1882, the one thing that's not changing is the street line. In 1892, excuse me, the structure is butted right up against, you know, where I think the sidewalk, or maybe even where the street actually was. And here you can see it's literally 4 feet moved back, as documented by these fire insurance maps. Also, the brick building, this brick building here is replacing this original wood frame stable, which I do believe there was a fire. So this renovation process took about 6 to 10 months, although that seems actually pretty quick, in my opinion, for the massive amount of renovating that seemed to happen. But it was worth it because it's lovely. And here is a photograph of the Miles Potter's Humes home, festooned in 1915 for the Old Home Week, which is a celebration in Buffalo. And I think it kind of goes without saying, although maybe not, that the house is really expressive of the developing prosperity of Buffalo, that there's this sort of boom, periods of boom, and also of the changing tastes of residential living. And, you know, what we know is that, as I said before, it was a great place to have a house. It was right on the edge of the business district and would only be developing further and further out as you went down Allegheny. And so what makes this really interesting to me is that this is a really good example of how early stone houses in Bellefonte were altered to suit the changing needs and tastes of the late Victorian period. So as opposed to demolishing this Georgian stone house, the decision to literally lift it up and move it back, one could say maybe was William demonstrating his success as a banker. Was he, you know, keeping up with his neighbors? Maybe. But because of it, we still have this structure, this original structure, adapted. And interestingly enough, it has Georgian characteristics, Victorian characteristics, classical characteristics, and Georgian revival. But alas, we're back to the timeline. 5 years later, William Potter Humes does die. And 14 years later, Anne Elmira also dies. And she is the last Humes descendant. In her will, though, Anne Elmira in 1935, she bequeathed the Humes home to the town of Bellefonte to be used as a library. As long as the community rallied financial support within a reasonable amount of time, which Bellefonte did, thanks also to the support of the Bellefonte Women's Club. So why we really wanted to do this webinar and tell this fun story today is that this is the quiet conclusion to what was our 80th anniversary year. And on this day, 81 years ago, October 25th, 1939, the Library and Historical Corporation of Bellefonte opened in the Miles Potter Humes house with a collection of 10,000 volumes comprising the county's first free public library. Now we've evolved. Time has passed. We function as the public library. It's worth noting that by the 1950s, those lovely porches, unfortunately, were deteriorated and removed. And point of fact, in 1956, the name of the library was then technically changed to Center County Library and Historical Museum. In 1973, the library grew rapidly, as you could imagine, and was in need of additional space. And so the library purchased and renovated the A&P supermarket that had just closed, which is across the street, now known, that's as our circulating branch. And in 1977, two things happened. The Miles Potter Humes house was added to the National Register of Historic Places. And the library opened its doors after transferring its main circulating collection to the newly renovated building, where the Center County Library continues to operate to this day. And so it brings us to today. The Centre County Library and Historical Museum System has 5 locations, of which the Pennsylvania Room and Historical Museum is one of. It operates out of our beloved Miles Potter Hume's house, and we are currently open with a small amount of modification. We're taking appointments, and let me go through with you if Robin wants to jump in with any sort of details there.
Sure. So obviously 2020 is kind of not the year that we quite expected, I think, collectively as a society, but beginning early in August, our library system was able to resume limited in-house services at its brick and mortar locations. So the Pennsylvania Room and Historical Museum are open for what we're calling limited in-house operations. So we're taking appointments for folks who want to come in and do research, and we are offering historical museum tours by appointment to small groups. So we are working really hard to keep all of our visitors safe and keep our staff safe, and also still connect everyone with, you know, this important special place and all of the valuable resources that it contains. So we are here for, you know, we've been here for 81 years. We're looking forward to our next 81 years, and we're really pleased that you're all interested in being a part of that.
Thank you, Robin. I'll just add to that, you know, I had mentioned this was kind of the quiet close to what would have been our 80th anniversary year. But more than that, both Robin and I thought it was really important to have the opportunity to provide some virtual programming about the story of how, as a library, we, you know, come to call the Miles Potter Hume's house our home. And if anything, I hope that you've been inspired to maybe pursue your own research interests. If you're interested in Sanborn maps, or if you're interested in deed searching, the PA room has a local history collection and many resources that I think you could draw from in order to work out, kind of scratch any itch that you might have for your own curiosity. Like I said, I myself had heard some stories and done some research, and it just leads to more research. And I thought, this is so curious. When did we get these weird dormer windows? When? Why? And so, yes, that is, I guess, to wrap up my presentation here. I'll just ask if anybody has any extra questions or comments, anything they'd like to add.
Yeah, so everyone go ahead and you can enter questions in that chat box. We do have 2 questions that came in during your talk, Erin. And the first is, are Jacob and Amy Way connected in some way to Way Fruit Farm? Would you like me to take that one, or did you want to take that?
I would like you to take that one. Great question.
Some of the things that I have picked up, and because I've lived here most of my life, and one of those is Way Fruit Farm is right down the road from, well, not right down the road, but right down the road on 550. So Way Fruit Farm is, so if I recall correctly, was founded by, you know, the Ways, who were a Quaker family who moved into Centre County and what's now Port Matilda in the late 1700s from southeastern PA. So I would be willing to guess in the early 1800s, if the Way family, if there are people with the last name Way selling land in Bellefonte, there's definitely a very good possibility that they are related to the same Ways who own Way Fruit Farm. I'm not entirely sure. I will say that Bellefonte, you know, this is kind of going down another rabbit hole. Bellefonte has a significant historical relationship with people who were Quakers. So that's definitely, you know, if that's something you're interested in, we can definitely dig into that in the Pennsylvania room. The next question we have is, do you happen to know who the folks are in the pic of the home from mid-1800s? And Erin, I actually pulled this photo up if you'd like me to share it so we can zoom in on it.
Okay, so let me stop my screen sharing.
Yeah, let me just.
There we go.
Okay, yes. Give us just a minute, folks. We're on the fly here. All right. So, are you able to see a photograph right now?
Yes.
Okay. So, I think that this is the photo that you were referring to with your question, and I assume you're speaking about these people down here in the lower left-hand corner. So, let's zoom in a little bit. So, full disclosure, my short answer is I'm not entirely sure who they are.
Me neither.
But if we're thinking about the mid-1800s, we would, we know at that time now who lived there. And I'm going to say that this person sitting in the chair looks like a man who is quite well dressed. And we see a carriage here. So maybe he was waiting for a carriage to come. So we could make a reasonable guess that that could be E.C. Humes. I will say that, this is a relatively large home, and as was typical at the time, the people who lived here would have employed people to help them in their home. So it's certainly possible that this is someone who worked here. However, as a general rule, I think anyone who wears light colored pants is not worried about getting particularly messy. So I would hazard a guess that this is one of the residents of the house. So I believe it would potentially likely be E.C. Humes. And then this gentleman with the horse is possibly affiliated with the home. Maybe he worked, in the carriage house stables area, or maybe he, worked independently of the home. We aren't quite sure, but that would be my best guess. Erin, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I think that is a great guess. I think that's as educated of a guess as we could get.
Yeah, and I will say, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. We don't have a precise idea of, we don't have a precise year for this photo. As is the case with, I think, a lot of historic photos. Most of ours are not dated. So when we say this is mid-1800s, we're making those conclusions based on the photo itself, so the type of photography that we're looking at, as well as what we see in the photo. So what the house looks like, what kind of clues are we getting, what other structures are we seeing. That's how we're coming to that conclusion, that this photo was taken sometime in the mid-1800s. So if anyone has any other questions, please go ahead and enter them in the chat. I do want to mention that Erin has kindly agreed to share her PowerPoint presentation. So you will all receive that via email later today. It's a great resource, and I'm really impressed. I kind of want to just print it out and hand it out to people who come to visit the Pennsylvania room. I also want to just kind of circle back to what Erin mentioned about helping people with research. If you do have historic or genealogical research interests, she mentioned all of the great resources we have. And as the person who manages this building and the library there, I feel like I need to mention that really the greatest asset we have goes home at the end of the day, and that's the staff. Erin and Judy are our primary research facilitators, and they are great sounding boards. If you have research questions or you just need a fresh set of eyes on something, so please don't hesitate to reach out to them, because Erin and Judy are two our library research assistant and our library and museum research assistant are what makes our collection not just a room full of books, it's a research facility because they are there. So with that, we don't have any more questions coming in. We can certainly wait, but Erin, I want to thank you so much for pulling together this presentation and sharing all of this information about the Miles Potter Humes house and its important place in Bellefonte's history.
Thank you. Yes, it was a lot of fun, and I've learned a lot about the house, spending a lot of time there. You become familiar with areas you would normally just probably pass by. So yeah, it was really great, and thank you very much.
Wonderful. So I'm going